welcome to What's Cooking Innisfil. Since we're now well into fall, for today's recipe, we're gonna be making a classic fall comfort food, chili. Now, I know there's 1,001 different ways to make chili and everyone has their own favorite recipe, so today I'm gonna be sharing one of my favorite chili recipes with all of you. So let's take a look at the ingredients we'll be using today. I have a couple cloves of garlic minced in here already, and I'm also gonna be using an onion. Now I like to load up my chili with veggies, so I'm gonna use some celery. I have a bell pepper, a zucchini, and a carrot. And in this dish here, I have some frozen corn, and of course some canned diced tomatoes. My favorite type of legume is chickpeas, so I'm going to be using chickpeas in my chili, but you can swap this out for black beans, kidney beans, pinto beans, a combination of whatever your favorite beans are. And I'm also going to be using ground chicken, but again, you can swap this out for your favorite type of protein, whether that's ground chicken, ground turkey, sticking to the classic ground beef, or even omitting the meat and just adding even more legumes for added protein. For the spices for our chili, I have ground cumin and of course chili powder. And my favorite thing about this recipe is how we serve it. So here I have a spaghetti squash, which we're gonna bake in the oven, and then we serve the chili over top of the squash noodles. So since this takes the most time, I'm actually gonna get started with the squash. So I already have my oven preheated to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm just gonna cut the end of the squash with the stem off, just a teeny bit of the end, so that I'm not trying to cut through the stem later. Just like that, and I'll put it in my waste bowl. And then I'm gonna cut the squash in half lengthwise. Now that I have the squash cut in half, you can see it's like roughly in half, not quite perfect. I'm going to scoop out the seedy innards. Just using a spoon for this, it comes out relatively easily. And I'll do the same with the other half. Okay, now that I have all of the seeds scooped out, as you can see, I'm just gonna drizzle a little bit of olive oil over top and spread it with my fingers so it's evenly coated. Okay. And then I'll sprinkle, in here I just have some salt and pepper. Just gonna sprinkle a little bit over top. And then once I have all of the salt and pepper sprinkled on, it's just gonna go on this baking sheet. I'm actually gonna do the open side down like this. And it's gonna go in the oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for about 30 minutes or so until it's fork tender. Now, while the squash is in the oven, I'm gonna get started on preparing the rest of our chili ingredients. So I have this large saucepan over here. I'm just gonna add a little bit of oil to the pan, just enough to get the veggies started and get their juices going. And I'll set this to medium heat. Just gonna give it a couple minutes to heat up, and then I'm gonna add the garlic to the pan, and I'm just gonna prep my veggies as we go and add them to the pan. So first I'll do the onion, just cutting it in half. And removing the outer layer. And then the onion will just get cut into really small pieces. My pan feels pretty hot now, so I'll add the garlic in. And also the onion. I'm gonna turn it down a little, actually it's sizzling quite a bit. And then I'll do the other half of the onion. I'm leaving the root end of the onion on. I'm just cutting off the other end. This is because when you cut the root part off, that is the part that really gets the onion gases flowing and makes your eyes water, which is happening a little bit to me from the last onion. So I like to leave that part on until the very end. So I'm cutting the slices, not getting into the root part. And then I cut my slices. This piece of the onion is a little weird, so I'm going to take it off. And then here is the chunk with the root still attached. Cutting it as close as I can. There we go. Now I'll add this to the pan as well.
Next, I'm going to add the celery. I'm just using a few stalks of celery because we're including a lot of veggies in this recipe, so we don't need too many pieces of celery. So I'm going to cut these 3 stalks into thin pieces. And then once I'm done that, I'll just add them into the pan along with the garlic and the onions. Next is the carrot. Again, I'm going to cut this into small pieces just like the celery. So I'm going to cut it lengthwise into quarters. And then each of the quarters I'm going to cut into thin pieces. If you have a really thin carrot or you're using baby carrots, you don't need to cut it lengthwise first. You can just go ahead and cut it into slices. Once the carrot is cut up, you can add that into the pan as well and mix everything together. Next, we'll prep the bell pepper. I'm going to cut off the top and the bottom and remove the stem. And then I'm going to cut the outsides off from around the seeds. I'm going to cut the top and the bottom into small pieces, and I'm going to do the same with the sides. I always like to cut the bell pepper with the skin of it facing down, so the inside part is facing up. I find it much easier to cut through it that way. Your knife doesn't slip as much. And once the bell pepper is all cut up, I'm going to add it into the pan along with the other veggies. And finally, we'll prep the zucchini. This again is just going to be cut into small pieces. So I'm going to cut it lengthwise into quarters, just like we did with the carrot, and then cut the quarters into thin pieces. If any of these veggies you don't like, you don't need to include them in the recipe. You can swap them out for a different veggie or just omit it altogether. There are a ton of nutrients in this recipe, so you won't be missing out by losing just one veggie. And we'll add this into the pan along with everything else.
So some of the tougher veggies, like the carrots, take a little bit longer to cook in the frying pan. So now that I've given the veggies a good head start and the carrots are somewhat cooked, I'm gonna add in my ground chicken. Just adding in the whole thing, that's 450 grams. And I'll just break it apart in the pan. The juices from the chicken will really help with the veggies finishing cooking. Just gonna mix it all together, and once the chicken has browned and is cooked, I'll add in the diced tomatoes, the corn and the chickpeas, and the spices. Here you can see the ground chicken is fully cooked and the veggies are fairly soft now. So I've reduced the heat to low and I'm going to add in the spices. I have in here, there was 1 teaspoon of the ground cumin and 2 teaspoons of the chili powder. So I'm just gonna mix it all together. And then I'll add in the corn. And the chickpeas. And I'll mix this in. This is a really full pan now, but it is full of really good stuff. So it's all mixed together. And then I'm gonna add in this can of diced tomatoes. Okay, so I'm gonna carefully mix it because it is really, really full. I'm actually gonna add another can of the diced tomatoes so I get enough liquids in here. The chili has been simmering for a few minutes now and everything is heated through. So I'm just gonna top it with a little bit of shredded cheese. This is just about a half a cup, maybe 2/3. You can do this at the end when you're serving it if you'd like, just on your individual plates in case there are some people who you're cooking for who don't want cheese on their chili. And as that's just gonna sit and melt for a couple minutes. And here I have my spaghetti squash out of the oven. As you can see, it's still kind of hot, but I'm letting it cool and it's definitely fork tender. So I'll flip this one over too. And maybe I'll hold it with an oven mitt while I do this. And I'm just going to pull it like this with the fork. And it turns into noodles, kind of like spaghetti, which is where the name comes from. So I'll just do that, make sure I get all of it so none of it is wasted. Okay, and the same with the other half. Spaghetti squash is great to eat just on its own like this, how we've done it in the oven and seasoned with a little bit of salt and pepper. You could add some different spices to it as well, or you could even use it as a substitute for pasta if you feel like it. You can top it with a meat sauce. That would be really tasty. Okay, so that is all pulled and looks like spaghetti. So now I can serve it.
In my bowl here, I'm just gonna add some of the spaghetti squash. I really like it, so I'm gonna add a lot to my bowl. And then I'll top it with my chili. So here we have one of my favorite chili recipes done and ready to eat. I really enjoy making chili because it's relatively simple and it doesn't take too long. This recipe only takes about 40 or 45 minutes. The most of the time is just taken up by the spaghetti squash cooking in the oven. And I also like these chili recipes because they make a ton of food. So you have leftovers for days, you can freeze some of them for later or share them with your friends or neighbors for dinner. I also really like it because you can pack a ton of nutrients into a chili. So many vegetables, lots of fiber, protein, and micronutrients that are important for our health. So I hope you guys enjoy my chili recipe.